To live from Seoul, I'm Shin Se-min, and these are the stories we're following at this hour. South Korea trims its growth forecast for this year and the next as trade tensions escalate and with the minimum wage hikes seen as choking the jobs recovery. The country's top economic policymaker also says the situation could get worse before it gets better. The European Union takes safeguard measures on steel product imports, riding the wave of global trade protectionism. And that could also hit Korea hard, a country that exports a massive amount of steel each year. Another hot and steamy day here in the country, with the mercury set to hit 37 degrees Celsius in some regions. We have the latest on the heat wave coming up. We start this morning with a grim economic outlook straight from Korea's top economic policymaker himself. Finance Minister Kim Dong-yeon says the situation down the road doesn't look bright and it may get worse. In a bid to cushion the gloomy outlook, the government says it'll create jobs, provide bigger tax credits to the low-income bracket, and raise pensions. Our Kim Hae-sung leads our coverage.
The government has cut its growth forecast for 2018 to 2.9%, down from its 3% projection last December and in line with the Bank of Korea's revised growth forecast released last week. At the same time, the government slashed its annual job growth estimates by around half, from 320,000 to 180,000 newly added jobs, citing relatively low consumption and investment. This comes after recent data showed that a monthly average of 142,000 new jobs were added in the first half of this year, marking the slowest job growth since the 2008 global financial crisis.
There's growing uncertainty in global trade and the financial market due to the US-China trade spat and global monetary policy normalization. If we do not make efforts to solve the current situation, difficulties in growth and jobs will continue. Economic growth could slow down, job growth and income distribution may not improve in the short term.
To help boost the local economy, Finance Minister Kim said the government will focus on job creation, income redistribution, and regulation reform. The government plans to increase fiscal spending by 4 trillion Korean won, or about $3.5 billion within its existing budget, by reallocating money from some of its state-managed funds. For an improvement in income redistribution, the government will support low-income earners by expanding earned income tax credits and hiking the basic pension for the elderly in the bottom 20% income bracket. Kim Hae-sung, Arirang News.
And staying with the South Korean government's forecast and what's being planned for the second half of this year, specific measures to support low-income households and the poorest senior citizens were told, and our Ko Ryun-hee tells us more.
As well as discussing economic growth and job creation, the South Korean government also promised to spend more on the underprivileged. The Finance Ministry announced on Wednesday that it will expand the number of low-income households eligible for earned income tax credit. The ministry said some $3.38 billion will be allocated to income tax credits starting next year, 3 times the amount currently spent. And the number of households eligible will almost double to 3.34 million households. The ministry is easing conditions to qualify for the support program, such as changing the annual income threshold. Economic experts say more measures may be needed for long-term benefits.
Policies like increasing income tax refunds are expected to help support domestic consumption and buffer people from the negative effects of the minimum wage hike. But only in the short run. The government has already injected nearly $3.5 billion in the first half of this year to support job creation, but it didn't help that much because these measures do not solve the fundamental structural problems in the economy.
And to support the poorest senior citizens, the government said it will raise the basic pension for them starting this year. People who are age 65 and older and belong to the bottom 70% of the income bracket will receive more than $220 a month of basic pensions starting this September. This is a $35 increase from the current amount. Meanwhile, to boost consumer spending, the government also lowered the personal consumption tax on automobiles from 5% to 3.5%, but the reduction will only apply for the rest of the year. 고륜이 아리랑 뉴스.
And more economic threat coming in. The European Union says it is putting in place safeguard measures of its own on 23 imported steel products following the U.S. imposing of tariffs on imported steel and aluminum. And South Korea might be one of the hardest hit as it is a major exporter of steel to the European market. Our Kim Yo-sun tells us more.
The EU will begin imposing provisional safeguard measures on imported steel products from Thursday to tackle the diversion of steel to the European market as a result of tariffs imposed by the U.S. An additional 25% tariff will be imposed on 23 steel products imported to the world's largest economic bloc once their volumes exceed the average quotas of the past 3 years.
We are working very closely with the industry to see whether steel or aluminium intended for the US market is coming to Europe and whether that is affecting the market, dumping prices and so on.
The provisional safeguard measures can be imposed for a maximum of 200 days. The European Commission will continue to look into the measures and decide whether to impose definite safeguard measures by the end of the year. It's also looking into imported aluminum to decide whether similar measures need to be in place. South Korea is among the countries to be affected by such measures, along with China, India, and Russia. As for the targeted 23 products, South Korea currently exports over 3.3 million tons of steel annually to the EU, worth some $2.9 billion. Seoul's foreign ministry has reportedly delivered concerns that the provisional safeguard measures may not only have a negative impact on reciprocal trade between the two parties, but also further spread trade protectionism globally. Kim Yo-sun, Arirang News.
The European Union is also set to impose heavy anti-dumping duties on Chinese electric bicycles to prevent the flooding of cheap imports. The European Commission says tariffs of between 21.8% and 83.6% will be imposed on all e-bikes imported from China. Now, that includes those made by Taiwan's Giant, the world's largest bicycle maker with manufacturing facilities in China and the Netherlands. The Commission explained that the number of Chinese e-bikes imported to Europe jumped threefold from 2014 to 2017. Shifting focus, it seems as though U.S. efforts to denuclearize North Korea as quickly as possible have been put on the back burner for a while. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo now admits negotiations to dismantle the regime's nuclear weapons program may take some time. Our Lee Seung-jae tells us more.
A day after U.S. President Donald Trump stated there was no time limit attached to the dismantlement of North Korea's nuclear weapons program, his top diplomat Mike Pompeo echoed his boss's remarks at a cabinet meeting on Wednesday, saying the negotiations may take some time. Pompeo added that the talks between the U.S. and North Korea will be taking place against a backdrop of the continued enforcement of existing sanctions. His assessment comes roughly 5 weeks after President Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un agreed at their summit in Singapore that Pyongyang would work towards the complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula in exchange for security guarantees from the U.S. Regarding the repatriation of American soldiers killed during the Korean War, Pompeo said North Korea is expected to repatriate the remains in the coming weeks, calling it commitment made by the North. A senior U.S. defense official says Washington hopes North Korea returns about 50 sets of remains within 2 weeks, but the details are still thought to be sketchy. This, despite 2 days of talks between U.S. and North Korean officials on the matter at the inter-Korean border on Sunday and Monday. Pompeo traveled to Pyongyang earlier this month, hoping to agree a roadmap for the regime's denuclearization, but he left empty-handed, and progress has been slow ever since. North Korea even issued an angry statement as soon as he left, accusing his delegation of making gangster-like demands of the North. However, despite the bluster, Pompeo is keeping his chin up, saying while more work is needed, the two sides find themselves in a, quote, very hopeful place. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
And South Korea is in a sticky situation after reports indicate that North Korea shipped its coal to the south last year in what would be a clear violation of international sanctions. And one of those ships that carried the coal from North Korea is believed to have gone in and out of South Korean ports over 20 times. Our Park Hee-jun explains.
South Korea is being questioned over its ability to implement UN Security Council resolutions after inadvertently importing some 9,000 tons of North Korean coal last year via Russia. Broadcaster Voice of America reported Tuesday that an expert panel under the UN Sanctions Committee found that North Korea shipped coal to the Russian port of Tomsk on Sakhalin Island 6 times between July and September 2017. The coal eventually found its way to ports in South Korea, with some of it unloaded at Incheon on October 2nd and some at Pohang on October 11th through ships that were later found to be operated by Chinese companies. And on Thursday, VOA, citing real-time port entries from marine traffic, reported that one of those ships had been passing in and out of South Korea 22 times since last November. According to the data, Rich Glory, the ship that transported coal to Pohang, was found to have entered the port of Busan just 2 weeks ago on July 4th. UN Resolution 2397, adopted in December last year, allows a country to capture and look into a vessel suspected of engaging in illicit activities with North Korea. But during all those stops, the South Korean government didn't take any such measures, even after it was aware of the illegal acts in October. Seoul's foreign ministry, however, has been emphasizing that South Korea is working closely with the international community to implement sanctions on North Korea. An official at the ministry told reporters that relevant authorities are investigating whether the coal is really from the north and whether South Korean private dealers were involved. The government also revealed Wednesday that a Togo-flagged ship believed to be involved in transporting North Korean coal is under investigation. Park Hee-jun, Arirang News.
Both Seoul and Pyongyang have been working on a number of projects together, and today, in the first of our two-part series, we take a look at where the two Koreas stand in their joint businesses together. Our Oh Jung-hee tells us more.
It was a hectic few weeks after the inter-Korean high-level talks in early June, with an array of talks and events taking place between the two Koreas. Inter-Korean military talks, Red Cross talks, and sports talks were held, and meetings to discuss cooperation on railway and road connections and forestation projects followed. A huge South Korean delegation of over 100 people visited North Korea earlier this month for the first inter-Korean basketball games in 15 years, and just this week, the South and North Korea military authorities fully restored their West Sea communication line, a move that further lowers tension following the halting of loudspeaker broadcast and stopping of propaganda leaflet distribution. And the two Koreas are getting ready for a lot more cooperation to come. In our two-part series, we go through each of these categories that Seoul and Pyongyang are working on together. The two Koreas began work in early June to set up a joint liaison office at the Kaesong Industrial Complex. It's where officials from South and North Korea will be stationed to make person-to-person contact, which will in the end serve as a direct communication channel between South and the North. The two Koreas are now renovating the facilities there at the factory park because they've not been used for over 2 years since the complex was shut down in February 2016. They're hoping to open up the office by mid-August. Renovations are also underway at the venue for next month's reunions of families separated by the Korean War. At the Red Cross talks last month, the two Koreas agreed to hold family reunion events for a week starting August 20th at the North's Mount Kumgang, with 100 participants each from South and North Korea. For that, a team of South Koreans will be at Mount Kumgang until mid-August, repairing and renovating the meeting rooms, rest areas, hotels, and others. Seoul and Pyongyang have also exchanged their list of candidates for the family reunions. They'll check whose family members remain alive and exchange the final list of participants in early August. It's not an exaggeration to say that sports is the field where the most is happening in terms of inter-Korean exchanges. Opportunities are lined up one after another. Right now, North Korean athletes are participating in the Korea Open table tennis competition in Daejeon, forming unified teams with South Korean players in men's and women's doubles. Teams from Seoul and Pyongyang will be marching together at the opening ceremony of the Asian Games in August and will form unified teams for rowing, canoeing, and women's basketball. It's also been determined that North Korea will compete in the World Shooting Championships that are being held in South Korea in September. That's all for part 1 of our series. For part 2, I'll have more on how the two Koreas are preparing for possible economic cooperation in the future, as well as the civil exchanges blooming between Seoul and Pyongyang. 오정희, Arirang News.
Mid-July is usually the monsoon season here in South Korea, but that does not seem to be the case this year. Instead, we're experiencing a real scorcher of the summer. The dry and very steamy conditions are set to last at least a week and could last the rest of the month and as well into August. Now, with that said, Korea isn't the only country in Northeast Asia that's feeling the heat, as our Hong-yu tells us more.
Hiding under the shades and fanning themselves, people try to deal with the scorching weather in South Korea, but they cannot escape from the heat. A heat wave warning has been issued for almost all regions except some coastal and mountainous areas. The temperature in Seoul hit 34 degrees Celsius on Wednesday, and Gwangju was as hot as 36 degrees, much hotter than Tuesday. The weather was worse for Daegu and Gyeongsangbuk-do, with the temperature rising to 37 degrees Celsius at noon. This year, the monsoon season has finished earlier than last year. But South Korea is not the only country experiencing this unusual weather. Other East Asian countries such as Japan and China are also experiencing a heat wave. Experts say that a huge high-temperature belt has formed around East Asia, heating up the region. Some areas of Japan even hit 40 degrees Celsius on Wednesday. The sweltering heat in Japan started last Sunday, and it is expected to continue until the end of the month. Meanwhile, Beijing hit 33 degrees Celsius. The heat wave began on Wednesday after the end of the torrential rain that had soaked Beijing since Sunday. 98.1 millimeters of rain fell on Beijing last Sunday alone, the most ever recorded in Beijing in a single day. As the scorching heat is causing heat stroke in South Korea and Japan, meteorological agencies advise people to avoid excessive outdoor activities and to pay special attention to their health. Hong-yu, Arirang News.
And in fact, East Asia is not only part of the world having a hotter than average summer this year. Summer heat waves have been breaking records across the Eastern Hemisphere as well. Now, for more, we connect to our Lee Ji-hyun at the Weather Center. Ji-hyun, now parts of the Northern America and Europe are also having a harsh summer, I hear.
Good morning, Sermin. Yes, Montreal in Canada had its highest temperatures in 147 years a couple of weeks ago. And Britain is sweltering under a July heat wave as well. So this summer of 2018 is shaping up to be 140 record books across the globe. And as for South Korea, burning sunshine and high humidity will make it feel even hotter than the actual temperatures today. So heat wave alerts have been issued for 5 consecutive days here in the capital and have been issued for more than a week for the southern provinces. And it's more likely we'll be under the heat alerts for the time being. And this afternoon, Seoul will get up to 34 degrees Celsius, Gwangju at 36, and Daegu and Gyeongju will top out at 37 degrees. Strong UV rays can burn your skin in just a few minutes, so be sure to apply a good amount of sunblock and stay hydrated. And the heat wave shows no sign of easing up. Starting this weekend, Seoul will see highs hovering around 35 degrees Celsius. That's all for now, but I'll have more updates in our later newscast.
Now, this just coming in. How much responsibility does South Korea as a whole bear for the nation's worst maritime disaster, the Sewol-ho ferry sinking? The Seoul Central District Court released its verdict moments ago on whether or not the state is responsible for the 2014 sinking that killed 304 people, mostly high school students. The ruling, the first of its kind since the family members of the victims filed a compensation suit in late 2015, also ordered that state should pay the compensation fee for the families of the victims. A total of 354 family members are the plaintiffs in the case, and we'll be sure to bring you more details in our later newscast. The 12 boys and their football coach who were rescued from a flooded cave in Thailand have spoken out publicly about their ordeal for the first time. For more on this and other news around the world, we turn to our Arirang at the news center. So Arirang, the boys looked healthy and well rested.
That's right, Simin. The 13 were released from hospital on Wednesday and made their way home. Just before they did that, they held a press conference in Chiang Mai wearing the kit of their football team, the Wild Boars. The team's assistant coach described the moment he realized that there was no way out of the cave.
I tried to go under the water and dig to see if we can go through, but I could feel that the bottom was all sand and the top was just rocks. I pulled a rope and they pulled me back. Afterward, I told one of the boys that we cannot exit this way.
Sitting alongside the Thai Navy SEALs who rescued them, one of the boys relived the moment they were discovered.
It happened in the evening while we were sitting on the rocks. We heard some noises of people talking at that moment, so we told each other to be quiet and listen to the noise. We weren't sure, so we listened. And it turns out, yes, it's true. I was surprised.
One of the boys also described how they lived on water from the stones within the cave. However, despite the hardship they went through, the team showed incredible team spirit during that press conference, lightening the mood by cracking some jokes. They also described how they were able to bond with rescuers who stayed with them for more than a week inside the flooded cave. There was, however, a somber moment briefly when they commemorated the former Navy SEAL who died during the rescue operation. The boys and their coach went missing on June 23rd and were found just over a week later. It took 3 days to get the whole team out. The European Commission has fined Google $5 billion for antitrust violations, the biggest fine given by European antitrust regulators against a single firm. The Commission said Wednesday that the tech giant had illegally abused the dominance of its mobile operating system, Android, by forcing phone manufacturers to exclusively pre-install its services such as Google Search and Google Maps. Phone makers that refused were reportedly blocked access to Google's Play App Store. The EC gave Google's parent company Alphabet 90 days to stop such practices or face further penalties. Alphabet has enough cash to easily pay off the $5 billion fine, but the firm says it'll appeal the ruling. The White House is scrambling to contain the backlash caused by President Trump's heavily criticized summit with Russian President Vladimir Putin. On Wednesday, Trump appeared to deny Russia was still targeting U.S. elections, contradicting warnings made by his top intelligence chief.
Is Russia still targeting the U.S.? Is Russia still targeting the U.S., Mr. President?
Press, let's go. Make your way out.
But White House spokeswoman Sarah Huckabee Sanders later insisted Trump was not replying to that specific question.
I had a chance to speak with the president after his comments, and the president said thank you very much and was saying no to answering questions. The president and his administration are working very hard to make sure that Russia is unable to meddle in our elections.
President Trump did go on to answer more questions after his cabinet meeting. He also said no U.S. president has been tougher on Russia than he has.
And that'll do it for us at the hour on Arirang News, but keep it tuned for more news updates coming up at noon Korea time. As always, thank you for watching and goodbye for now.